Rome liked law in public places. It liked tablets and magistrates, witnesses, formal words, and the authority of a citizen standing before another citizen with a claim that could be heard. But most Romans met law in smaller rooms first. They met it when a room was let above a shop, when a price was agreed for grain or oil, when a cart was hired for a journey, when a craftsman accepted materials and promised finished work, when a manager acted for someone absent, or when a public contract was auctioned to private bidders. That is where this account begins. Rome was a city of command, and command alone could not rent rooms, sell goods, hire labor, build walls, collect taxes, run shops, or trust captains and managers at a distance. For that, people needed obligations that held. A Roman obligation was more than a casual promise. It was a legal bond. One person had to give something, do something, provide something, or answer for something, and another person could seek a remedy if that duty failed. So the questions are practical ones. What did contract mean in a Roman world that had no modern general theory of contract? Why do the sources ask for caution before later legal headings are laid over earlier life? How did formal promise work before sale and hire became easier to enforce? How did rent, work, sale, agency, and partnership shape daily exchange? How did private obligation enter public life through tax farming and public works? And what kind of society did contract serve when Rome remained unequal, hierarchical, and dependent on the power of the household? One caution must stand near the front. The cleanest Roman legal categories often come from later jurists, and from compilations made long after much of the practice began. Juristic writing and imperial constitutions show legal life through reflection and abstraction. They are essential, and they do not simply photograph daily practice. And once papyri and business documents are brought into view, actual practice can differ sharply from the tidy law of the books. That does not make the later categories useless. It means they must be used honestly. A later jurist can help us name sale and hire, partnership, mandate, and pledge. A transaction document can show people actually borrowing money, securing promises, arranging auctions, and linking one deal to another. The best picture comes when the two kinds of evidence are held together. The jurist gives shape. The document gives the dirt under the fingernails. The Sulpicii tablets are valuable for exactly that reason. They come from business at Puteoli, the great commercial harbor of Campania, not from a jurist composing a tidy lesson. They preserve loans and guarantees, pledges, auction notices, and connected client files. In them, Roman obligation does not appear as a line of separate textbook chapters. Credit touches security, security touches sale, sale touches enforcement. One file can show the same commercial life from several sides at once. This is why Rome under contract should not sound like a dry tour of legal labels. It is a way of looking at Roman public and private life through the question of reliability. If a man promises a price, what makes the price matter? If a room is let, what protects the use of the room? If a craftsman takes a job, what happens when bad work comes back? If a slave or a son manages business for the head of the household, who can be reached when a debt is made? If the state lets out a public contract, what stands behind the bidder's promise? The older Roman answer began with form. Early Roman law had a small number of powerful formal acts, and two matter especially here. Mancipatio was a formal transfer used for the weighty kinds of property of an older farming world: land, slaves, beasts of burden, and certain rural rights. It required the parties, 5 Roman citizen witnesses, and the symbolic use of bronze and scales. It made transfer public, memorable, and hard to deny. Stipulatio was different. It was a formal spoken promise made through question and answer. One person asked whether the other promised to give or do a thing, and the other answered in matching words. It was a legally binding verbal contract of wide application, and the legal tradition treats it as a kind of empty vessel. The image works because the form was strict, while the lawful content could vary. Money, performance, guarantee, and many other duties could be poured into the spoken form. The point is not that early Roman law was simple because Romans led simple lives. The point is that a strict form could make many different promises enforceable. The words mattered because the words made the obligation clear. In a society where writing was not yet the ordinary basis of every deal, a formal spoken exchange, made in the presence the law required, could carry weight. It told both sides, and anyone later judging the dispute, that this was not loose talk. That helps explain a phrase that sounds technical and matters for the whole episode. Roman law became a law of contracts, not a modern law of contract. Rome did not begin from one broad abstract principle that every serious agreement should be enforceable because agreement itself has moral force. Roman law developed named forms and named types of obligation. Stipulatio could carry many promises. Later, sale, hire, partnership, and mandate became recognized contracts in their own right. The change was driven by life as much as by doctrine. As Roman commerce widened, the older formal methods could not carry every exchange comfortably. Trade involved absent parties, goods moving through ports, letters and messengers, mixed populations, and dealings beyond the old citizen body. The rise of the consensual contracts belongs with Rome's economic transformation and with the peregrine praetor, the magistrate who helped handle disputes involving foreigners. Business needed forms that could move with it. A consensual contract was one formed by agreement itself, once the relevant kind of contract was recognized. Sale, hire, partnership, and mandate are the classic four. They did not begin by requiring writing, delivery, solemn witnesses, or the older ritual form. Agreement could be enough. That sounds almost ordinary now, and it was a major development. It meant that law could follow a bargain while the object, the work, the rent, or the task still lay in the future. Sale shows the change most clearly. In a sale, the essential points became the thing sold and the price. Once the parties agreed on those, the contract could exist. The thing did not have to be handed over first. The price did not have to be paid first. The parties did not have to stand in the same room if agreement could be reached by messenger or by letter. Roman law had found a way for exchange to move faster, without giving up the idea that a real bargain had to be provable. Proof still mattered. Earnest money, called ara, could be handed over as a sign that the bargain was serious. It was not the source of the sale's validity, but it could help prove that the sale had truly been made. Writing too became common for important dealings as business grew more complex, but writing was not the original heart of the contract. The heart was agreement on the thing and the price. Sale then drew the law into the market's rougher corners. The aediles were magistrates with responsibility for parts of urban and market order, including certain sales in the open markets. Late Republican aedilician rules required sellers of slaves and of some animals to disclose defects, disease, runaway status, and promised qualities. That rule tells us something important. A market that can bind people quickly also needs rules about what must be said before the bargain is struck. Silence can become a kind of injury when the buyer is asked to trust the sale. Hire widened the picture from ownership to use. The Latin heading was locatio conductio, the term later jurists used for letting and taking a thing for payment. The category covered three ordinary experiences. A thing could be hired: a room, a house, a shop, a farm, a cart, an animal. Services could be hired, labor performed for wages. And work could be hired. A person accepted a task and had to produce a result. The hire of a thing makes Roman urban life easier to imagine. A person renting a room or a shop needed more than the landlord's smile. The thing let had to remain usable for the promised purpose. Repairs could matter, interference could matter, and if the arrangement failed, the renter could have a claim against the person who let the property. Yet the tenant's position stayed fragile by modern standards. If the property was sold before the hire ended, enjoyment might be disturbed unless further protection had been arranged. Rome could price use and give remedies. It did not turn every renter into a secure possessor. The hire of services shows the social order beneath the legal form. Ordinary paid labor could be hired. Workers could be paid for transport, manual work, or service. But the higher status liberal pursuits stood differently. They were not treated simply as wage services and were joined instead to honoraria, payments framed as marks of honor rather than ordinary wages. The law could organize paid work. Roman status language still told people which kinds of work were respectable and which carried the smell of dependence. The hire of work brings us into the workshop. Here the focus was not effort alone but result. If a craftsman accepted a task as a craftsman, inexperience itself could count as fault. The rule is plain and hard. A man who takes a skilled job is not allowed to escape responsibility by saying, after the failure, that he lacked the skill he claimed by accepting the work. The law is not speaking in grand moral language here. It is protecting the ordinary trust that lets one person hand over material, money, and time to another person's competence. Mandate carries the account from exchange to delegation. A mandate began as a request to do something for another. Its roots lie in personal requests, often between friends, often in legal or near-legal settings, standing as a guarantor, acting for someone in a proceeding. The beginning is social before it is commercial. One person asks another to act, and the relationship rests on trust. But Roman life needed delegation beyond friendship. Someone had to manage business when the owner was absent. Someone had to buy, sell, collect, carry, or represent. Mandate widened into the management of business, and there is danger in translating it too quickly into modern agency. In modern language, we imagine an agent acting directly for a principal, so that the principal is bound as if he had acted in person. Roman law did not begin with one clean rule of that kind. The reason lies partly inside the Roman household. The Familia was not the modern nuclear family. It included all those under the legal power of the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, slaves and sons in power among them, and these people could be deep inside business. A slave might manage a shop. A son under paternal power might trade. A ship captain or a business manager might strike deals that mattered to someone higher in the legal order. Commerce moved through people who did not all share the same status. Rome solved the problem by building remedies around particular relationships. The peculium was a fund or property allowance associated with a slave or a son in power, though final control stayed with the superior. If business was done through that fund, a creditor might reach it through a specific action. If the superior's estate had been enriched, another remedy could matter. If the superior had expressly ordered the transaction, liability could follow the order. The law looked for authorization, enrichment, business assets, and the shape of the appointment. Later remedies made this more practical for enterprise. An institor was a person set in charge of a business. A ship captain could create liability for the shipowner within the scope of the captain's role. These remedies did not erase the hierarchy of status, they worked inside it. Scope mattered because a manager should bind his superior only within the business he had been appointed to conduct. Authorization mattered because Rome wanted commerce to move without making every head of household answerable for every act done in his name by anyone standing near him. Partnership moved the problem from acting for someone to acting together. The Roman societas was a common undertaking for mutual benefit, and it did not require every partner to contribute the same kind or amount of value. Money could count, labor could count, expertise could count, risk could count. A partner who exposed himself to dangerous travel might be treated differently from one who only supplied funds. Roman law understood that capital could be carried in the body, in the skill, and in the danger taken by the man doing the work. Partnership also required accounting. Partners had to answer for what they did within the common venture. Proper expenses could be claimed, negligence could matter. Some of the juristic discussion descends into the real costs of movement, travel expenses, horses, pack animals, the road itself. That level of detail is revealing. Partnership was not only an idea about shared profit. It was a working arrangement for people whose business required distance, effort, and trust. From partnership, we can step directly into public life, because the Roman state leaned on private contractors. The Publicani were private contractors, or groups of them, engaged in public business, above all tax farming and state contracts. Tax farming took a partnership form, with the state selling the right to collect taxes to partnerships of Publicani. The arrangements commonly ran 5 years, tied to the census cycle. They could make administration efficient for the state. They could also produce abuse, corruption, and resentment among those who paid. Polybius shows how wide this public contract world became. Public contracts were issued for the building and repair of public works across Italy, and for rivers, ports, orchards, mines, land, and other things under the state's control. Some men bid before the censors in the forum, others entered partnership with bidders, some stood surety, others pledged their wealth to the state. The scene is not one official commanding work into existence. It is a public economy of bids, partnerships, guarantees, and pledged property. The administrative point is plain. The Republican state kept no great directly employed workforce for every public task. Work requiring organized labor was contracted to private individuals who could form joint companies for the purpose. Their work could include road building, the supply of the army, public buildings, and the taxes of provinces. The public contract was therefore no side detail. It was one of the ways Rome made a large state operate without building a modern administrative machine. The same pattern reaches municipal ground. Local magistrates contracted with citizens for tax farming, fishery concessions, and public works. The sums could be large enough that several men formed a partnership, while one stood forward as the manceps, the named bidder. Public authority did not simply accept a promise and hope. Sureties could be required, land could be registered as security. The public creditor wanted something to seize or pursue if the promise failed. The Puteoli wall contract of the 2nd century BC makes this concrete. Work near the Temple of Serapis required the successful bidder to provide sureties and register land as security at the discretion of the duumvirs, the 2 local magistrates. A wall might look like stone and labor. Legally, it contained also names, guarantees, property, and public oversight. Behind the masonry stood an enforceable chain of promise. This is the public meaning of contract in Rome. Public works, tax collection, supply, leases, and concessions rested on private obligation made reliable enough for official use. The reliance had advantages. It spread risk, drew private capital into public tasks, and let the state do more than its own staff could do directly. It carried obvious dangers too. Contractors could take the short view. Tax farmers could squeeze the people while their contract lasted. Public benefit and private appetite sat at the same table. None of this made Rome a society of equal bargainers, and that is the final caution. Contract did not cancel rank. It did not make landlord and tenant equal. It did not make the hired laborer the social peer of the man receiving an honorarium for elite service. It did not give a slave manager the standing of a free merchant. It did not stop public contractors from using power harshly. Roman contract worked inside a society of status, slavery, patronage, property, and political privilege. That is exactly why it matters. Contract gave hierarchy its instruments. It made promises enforceable between unequal people. It let landlords rent and buyers buy, workers hire themselves out, craftsmen answer for their skill, managers act within their authority, partners pool their risk, and the state lean on private bidders for public tasks. It did not soften Rome into a modern marketplace. It made Roman life more reliable on Roman terms. So Rome under contract is no hidden chapter beside the greater history of roads, armies, magistrates, and conquest. It belongs inside that history. A road could be built by public contract. An army could be supplied through private obligation. A shop could be managed by someone acting under another's authority. A harbor city could leave us tablets where loans, guarantees, pledges, and auction notices sit together in one commercial world. Rome could command, and it also had to make promises hold across absence, delay, distance, and failure. That is the durable discovery at the center of the episode. A society does not need a modern theory of contract before obligation becomes one of its strongest habits. Rome built forms, remedies, securities, and named dealings strong enough to carry daily exchange and public work. The result was not free equality. It was enforceable dependence. Under the marble, the roads, the markets, and the magistrates, Rome ran on promises that the law could make answerable.